Okay, so if you didn't see what seemed like almost every Google employee tweeting out these three little flash symbols yesterday, today is the release of Gemini 3 Flash. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what's new. I'm going to go through some of the use cases that I think it's going to be really strong at. And I'll also walk through some code examples that I've been using to test it on over the past week or so since Google DeepMind gave me early access to this. Okay, the simple summary for Gemini 3 Flash is that definitely this model is a lot better than its predecessor, the 2.5 Flash. If anything, I would say on the whole, this model seems to be roughly on par with 2.5 Pro. In fact, at some things, it's even better than both the 2.5 Pro, and surprisingly, in some of the benchmarks, like the SWE Bench Verified, this model is not only outperforming the 2.5 series, but it also outperforms Gemini 3 Pro. And while I don't think it's too beneficial to go into benchmarks too much, it is kind of interesting to see how this compares to Gemini 3 Pro. So you can see here that Gemini 3 Pro without tools is getting 37.5% on this humanities last exam. Well, the Flash model itself is getting 33.7% on it. And if we look at something like GPQA Diamond, we can see that the Flash model is only just behind Gemini 3 Pro. On AMI 2025, Flash model is slightly ahead. Same for MMU Pro. Now, I don't necessarily buy into that the Flash model is more intelligent than the Pro model. What I think is that the current versions, the Flash model is perhaps tuned a bit better than the Pro has been tuned. And my guess is that we will see a bump in Gemini 3 Pro when we finally get the GA version. And I think this really just reinforces what I started off with saying, that this model is definitely a lot more intelligent than the 2.5 Flash model, and than often even the 2.5 Pro model. For a while now, I've said I'm often more interested in benchmarks that compare the current version to either previous versions or to other models in the same family. And this particular benchmark I find is really interesting. And this is all about better token efficiency. And you can see here that lower is better, meaning that the amount of tokens needed to get the job done with Flash is actually lower than both Gemini 3 Pro, Flash 2.5, and Gemini 2.5 Pro. And this is something that I noticed in my testing as well, is that it definitely seems to be a model that gets to the point quickly. And I think because of that, this is going to become people's sort of daily driver model or their workhorse model. I think this is going to be the model that people are going to be using the most for building apps. Now, obviously, if you're using something like the Gemini app, where you're not actually paying for each call, you're going to stick to the Pro model. But if you're actually paying for each call and you've built an app and you've got it out there in production, you're probably already very focused on the ROI of tokens, right? The whole cost of tokens and what can be achieved with them. And this is one of the things that internally Google is also seem to be focused on with this model. Both the anti-gravity IDE and the Gemini CLI tool are both planning to make heavy use of the Gemini 3 Flash model. And that basically shows that for a lot of the tasks now, this model probably is going to do as good on simpler tasks as Gemini 3 Pro. And in that case, that allows you to free up the use of Gemini 3 Pro just for things that are going to require that extra intelligence boost. I know from seeing some of the internal demos with anti-gravity that one of the cool things about this model is just how fast it can render code out when you're actually building an app or making changes to an app, etc. So a lot of the key things that the Gemini team has focused on here are things like reasoning. The model has reasoning. It also has the ability for you to set that thinking level and actually have it to be at a sort of minimal level if you don't want to actually use reasoning tokens. The other big areas where this model seems to shine are things like tool use and especially multimodal stuff. Now, I know from my own testing, this model is extremely good at multimodal structured data extraction. So you can put in an image, and I'll walk through some examples of this in a second, of where you want it to extract out information about that image, about what's going on in that image, about what appears there and how things relate to each other. And this model definitely shines at that kind of task with the intelligence, but also just the speed and the lower cost than the Pro model. So that brings us to the pricing. And unfortunately, this model is more expensive than the previous Flash model. You're looking at, for all context lengths, input being 50 cents per million tokens and output being $3 per million tokens out. That compares to the old price of 30 cents per million tokens in and $2.50 per million tokens out. So it is a little bit more expensive than the 2.5 Flash. But in my limited testing, I've also seen that it does seem to actually make use of the number of tokens, perhaps much better than the 2.5 Flash as well. So I think overall, let's just jump into the model and have a look at some of the features that it actually can do and have a look at the outputs that it generates. Okay, so if you want to test out the model yourself, just come into AI Studio. You can select the model in here and you can basically try it out. Now, there are a couple of things I'll point out when you're actually trying this out. One of the key things with this model is the thinking level. If I set it to high and I ask it something like, what is the meaning of life? It will go off and it will go into thinking mode. And we will get some quite in-depth thinking, depending on what the question is. If we don't want to use thinking, though, we can basically just set this to minimal. So you see, if I set this to minimal here and then come in and do it, I'm now just going to get a much faster answer out. So in some ways, you can think of this minimal setting as getting the model to act like the Flash 2.0 model, which didn't have any thinking in it. Now, obviously, the other things we can change in here is we can put on structured outputs, we can do code execution, we can do function calling, etc. Another new setting that we've got, just like we've got with Gemini 3 Pro, is this media resolution setting. So this is something that you can sort of experiment if you're going to be passing images in. This is something that definitely is worth experimenting with to sort of see if you want to do things like bounding boxes, if you want to do things like finding things in images or any sort of multimodal task. This is definitely worth checking out there. Okay, so jumping into a Colab, what I've done is basically take some of the sort of old examples and also combine it with some new things in here to basically show you what I think this model is going to be really strong at. So like I've mentioned before, for me, the Flash models are really your workhorse model. And we've now got this workhorse model that can get roughly sort of on par with what Gemini 2.5 Pro was, but now it is much faster and much cheaper. And that's the strength of the Flash model. So personally, I think where people are going to get the best use of this are going to be things like structured outputs with this model. So where you can leverage off the intelligence of the model to do a variety of different tasks. A lot of the time, that's going to be things like extraction, etc. So if we come in here and start looking at some structured outputs out. So I'm using the new interactions API in this Colab just to show you some of the things that it can do. But you can see here, we've got a bunch of different tasks. So the first one here is meeting notes to action items. So using Pydantic, we can define a bunch of classes. We can then nest classes in there, and then we can just pass in some text. In this case, I've got a dummy meeting transcript. And we're then going to just pass this through and get this response format out for this meeting analysis here. And you can see, sure enough, it's able to go through the conversation that we had here, extract out decisions made, extract out action items, and do a variety of different tasks like this. And the cool thing with the Gemini 3 Flash is that it's able to do all of these in one shot. So you don't need to worry too much about checking things. Of course, if you want to be really sure, you can actually set up verification systems, etc. But in my testing, it's actually very accurate at being able to do these kind of extraction tasks and to be able to apply intelligence to them to sort of work out what certain things mean, what certain relationships are, etc. And these can be things like your standard sort of sentiment and emotion analysis. This model has no problem being able to handle those kind of things. Another area where this just totally shines is applying these sort of extraction things to multimedia. So that can be images, it can be audio, it can be PDFs. Here you can see I've got an image, and this is just like a picture of a tom yum soup in here. And what we're doing here is this is going to be our input, and we're going to define some classes of ingredients and recipe, and we're going to leverage the intelligence of the model to look at the image, analyze the dish, provide a complete recipe to recreate it. So you can see that going through this, it has no problem sort of working out that, okay, this is tom yum seafood soup. We've even got things like, where does the cuisine come from, dish name, difficulty, preparation, all those sorts of things. It's able then to work out sort of what the actual ingredients should be. Interestingly, you wouldn't necessarily always perhaps have sort of mussels in there, but it's seen it in the picture, so it's adding it in here. And then it's able to basically give you the steps for actually making the recipe out. Another one that I played around with here, you can see this is like spaghetti bolognese kind of thing. And what I added in here was in the ingredients to get it to estimate calories in here. Sure enough, it will go through and it will actually estimate out the calories for the different elements that you're putting in there, and of course, give us the recipe out. So any of these kind of tasks where you've got some kind of image that you want to basically analyze, you want the model to be able to extract things out, this is where Gemini 3 Flash is definitely doing a lot better and is able to do these kind of tasks in a pretty quick time as well. All right, next up, we can do the same kind of thing for PDF files. So here we've got basically a resume parser. We've got a bunch of Pydantic classes again. We're going to put in a resume. In this particular case, I got one of my team to actually make just sort of a fake resume in here. The interesting thing with this is we didn't coordinate what the actual fields would be. So this is basically taking their resume, not knowing what I was going to be searching it for, and me sort of putting what we're going to search for in this resume, and then be able to actually run it through. And you can see it does a pretty good job at being able to extract out all the information in here. This is one of the things that I think is going to be the sort of day-to-day workhorse tasks that people are going to do with this model, is have it just troll through large amounts of data, whether that data is text, PDFs, images, audio, almost whatever kind of data that you've actually got here, you can start to put it into some format that you can get it into this model. Another example was I took one of the handwriting forms from the previous old examples. You can see this is a form with handwriting on it. If we basically tell it that, hey, we want you to extract out the plan name, the mailing address, the zip code, it actually does a really good job at getting all of this. So the mailing address, 235 Park Street Avenue. Sure enough, it gets that. It gets the zip code. It even gets things like the total plan liabilities, and it's able to extract those out. So I do feel a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit out of just using this model for different kinds of data processing. And the cool thing is with these prices, it actually makes sense to do this. So when I've been testing, one of the things I found myself thinking multiple times that there's plenty of startups out there that are just analyzing resumes or just doing these things. A lot of those tasks now could be automated by a model like this. All right, next up, I've got some of the spatial understanding tasks in here and given it to Gemini 3 Flash to see how it performs. And we've got, some pretty good results, some mixed results, not everything perfect in here, but maybe this would be one of the areas that will be improved on after the preview. So remember, this is just the first preview version of the model. We will probably get another version or two before we get to the GA version of the model. So in here, we've basically given it pinpoint everything that could be a safety issue for a child. And we're asking the model to just give us points in the image in here. And you can see that if we plot those out, and by the way, all of the code for doing the plotting and stuff like that, I just asked Gemini 3 Flash to actually write that itself. You can see here that it's done a reasonably good job. So I'm not sure if I would say that indoor plants are potentially toxic for children, but we've got some good things of like, it sees that that's a dishwasher, that's a sink, that we've got lower drawers with finger pinching hazards, electrical outlets. It's done a pretty good job at understanding what each of the things are in here, even things like the knife block, sharp objects. So again, this is combining the strong multimodality aspects of the model with its intelligence in here. Another good one for trying this kind of thing is bounding box detection. So I had some hit and miss with this. I find it's very good for 2D bounding boxes. You can see here that it's been able to find, we've asked it to find things like curtains, toaster, blender, microwave, and sink, and it's had no problem at finding those in the image and drawing bounding boxes around them. Now, for the 3D bounding boxes, I found that sometimes it works really well. Sometimes the bounding boxes are a little bit overly big for what it's actually trying to detect. It clearly knows where the different things are, and it's clearly got a good sense of the 3D positioning of that element, but it's not always giving the best coordinates out in here. So going back to it, this is one of the things where I've just been sticking to the default media resolution, but I might want to play around with medium and high to sort of see, like, if you did try this out, will you get better results? Another test is basically looking at, can it find elements when you've given it multiple images of the same thing? And again, this has no problem at being able to work out the different shoes, the bag, the toy jellyfish, etc., that it was being asked up here to basically label as A, B, C, D. So I do think these kind of abilities are going to open up a whole bunch of new tasks that people can do with these kind of models. And while perhaps the Gemini 2 models showed signs of life for a lot of these things, really now we're getting models that are much stronger at this and able to put all of these things together. Just lastly, I know someone was asking in the interactions video about, could we just pass in a JSON format if we didn't want to do something with Pydantic? Yes, you can do that. You can see here that we can just structure what it is that we want out. And then we're able to basically get the model to just go through and extract out the things that we want from this. So I do feel these sort of analysis tasks are where this model really kind of shines. And while you can use it for chat and while you can use it for those kind of things, you can certainly combine it with tools to do things like chat, etc. But on the whole, I think this is going to become just your everyday workhorse model that you throw everything at, and then you only upgrade to the Pro if you start seeing this thing not be able to handle it. So I haven't had a chance to do a lot of agent stuff with this yet, but the stuff that I have tried out, it's pretty rock solid at that. So my guess is that this will become a favorite model for people building agents where they need some sort of intelligence. And you can imagine that with the pricing here, you can have one stream of the model conversing with a customer and have another instance of the model actually just checking the conversation and running different tools to do lookups and to do things like that. So I think that's something that I'll be playing more with in the future. Anyway, I think the best thing is just come into AI Studio. You don't even need an API key to get started and try out this model. Try it out on your own prompts and see how is this going to work for you. Personally, it seems to me that we've got a nice bump in intelligence across the board here. We've got a lot of the benefits that the Gemini team has been working on recently around structured outputs. And then we've got the speed, and relatively, this is a cheap model compared to the Pro or even other models that are out there from OpenAI and from Anthropic, etc. So have a play with the model yourself. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm quite conscious that the Flash models, people either tend to love them or hate them. The thing that I would say is that if it's not working for your particular use case, put that in the comments. I know from testing these models that the Gemini team is constantly looking at how to improve these for various tasks, perhaps that they never even thought of, etc. So if you've got some ideas, please put them in the comments and let me know. I will certainly pass them on. Anyway, as always, I will talk to you in the next video. Bye for now.